All right, everyone, is interview time, and we are here with repeat guest and beloved friend, and we call her our resident sex therapist, but she's also a neuroscientist. This is Dr. Nan Wise. OMG, she's one of our mini spirit animals. And so we, as if you're a regular listener, we did an episode, and we're not shit talking this person, but we did an episode with Gigi Engle, and we received a lot of feedback around this. It was about sex and porn addiction. We received emails that said, "Thank you so much for that episode. It felt very freeing, really spoke to my experience and the shame that I've experienced around that." And we also received a lot of emails from people saying, interesting, because sex and porn addiction is very real for me or for someone I know or for a lot of people I know. And they felt that there was some of the language that was limiting and the requests. So what we do at Shameless Sex, we don't take down episodes. If they're controversial, we have, there's plenty of episodes, y'all, that we would like to take down. This actually isn't one of them for us. We didn't not want to take this down.
No.
But there are episodes we're like, oh, we want to take this one down.
There's a couple.
Yeah,
one of them's personal for me.
Yeah, one is personal for me too. But we don't take them down. What we do is we address them later with other educators, doctors, and in this case, someone had said, or a couple of people said, can you bring in someone who is a neurologist or a neuroscientist? You know, someone that understands the brain, isn't just a therapist. And so we're like, Nan's perfect. She's all these things. You know, she is a neuroscientist and an amazing sex therapist. And so we are here to revisit sex and porn addiction. So sex and porn addiction round 2 with neuroscientist Dr. Nan Wise. So Dr. Nan, even though you've been on her show, God, I don't even know.
5 times, 6 times?
Might be, she might, yeah. You're like one of our top.
She's like, I don't know.
So,
and in her book, she's in her book so much because of the amazing episodes we've had with you.
Yeah,
so.
she has taught us so much. So, Nan, even though you've been on our show many times, can you tell us a little bit more about how you got to where you are today in the field of sexuality, but especially as a neuroscientist?
I've always been really fascinated by the brain. And I always was fascinated about how we can work the brain better. I come from a long line of anxious people. And so one of my big challenges was navigating my own anxiety. So it was my personal and professional journey. So as I started to be able to extend my trainings and learn more about, you know, what happens in the brain when people have all sorts of moods, then I went back to do a PhD and I studied sex in the brain, orgasm in the brain, pleasure in the brain. So for me, it's a passion of really, my book, Why Good Sex Matters, is really more about understanding how the brain mind works. And I think this topic is so wonderful. And I can completely understand how Gigi was not a big fan of the diagnosis of sex addiction. And the reason why is first of all, it's not been well studied. And because sex is such a charged area, what happens is people put all sorts of opinions and their own discomfort around sexuality to start to pathologize other people's sexuality. So, you know, it's really important to understand that we need to understand what addiction is and get clear on what that means to the brain, mind, and then understand how, for some people, sexually compulsive behaviors become very problematic. So it's a both-end universe. We have to be very careful about just sort of diagnosing people based on our discomfort. Now, if you think about it, it was up until 1974 that they considered homosexuality a mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people, most of the time, what they have judged, and I'm talking about even people in my field of psychology, anything that was not your vanilla sexuality as pathological. So for a very long time, and it continues to this day, people who are practitioners of, for example, BDSM, there was that underlying belief on the part of mental health professionals that reflected some kind of childhood sexual trauma or some emotional problems. And it's only been relatively recently that people have actually studied, for example, Peggy Kleinplatz and Charles Mosier, actually studied people who had BDSM. They did a study and they found that they had no more mental issues than the average population of vanilla people.
Mm-hmm.
So, sex, as you both are well aware of, is a very triggering conversation for a lot of people. So, based on the fact that we judge people's sexuality, if it makes us uncomfortable, if it's not what we consider normal. So, in ASECT, the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, they used to have a T-shirt. Am I normal? Because that's the people are always worried about that.
That's like the number one question and that was how we started our book.
Yeah. So, one of the things that we need to do is some really good research on things like what they call sexual compulsive behaviors. So let me just back it up and talk about addiction in general. So I think it might help your listeners to understand that there are different ways to look at addiction that may help people be clearer on when something becomes a problem. Like if you think of addiction as a disease, it's not very helpful. If you think about addiction as learning gone bad, the concept I'd like to focus on for you and the listeners is to think about how the brain mind functions. And we have probably talked about, or you've talked about, or thought about the reward processes, the reward system in the brain. One of the things that we need to understand is the reward system is really more of a learning system. So when those systems work well, when the reward circuitry works well, we have good satisfaction from our everyday pleasures. We're able to experience pleasure. We're able to regulate our moods. So when that circuitry works well, people have a tendency to not overdo things to the point where they're compulsive. So people can socially drink, they can have sex, they can do all sorts of stuff without it becoming problematic. Where things cross over the line, whether we're talking about substance abuse, whether we're talking about compulsive sexual behaviors, is when the person's learning reward circuitry is not working well to begin with. What happens is they use the substances or the behaviors to regulate when they're having negative moods or when they're feeling stressed. So essentially, they are self-medicating for a reward circuitry system that isn't working so well, and they're learning connections that bring them down a bad path. So they learn to turn to the substance or the behavior to self-soothe, to self-regulate, rather than being able to have a healthy relationship with their hedonistic practices, food, sex, all of that. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Totally.
it does. And that was kind of the first question, which thank you, because you tapped in, and I wanted to break this open right away by asking, how you define this sex addiction. From what I'm hearing, it's porn or sex addiction, let's say, that it is something that it's a neural pathway that your brain links to maybe some sort of freedom or happy vibes or what
coping mechanism,
dopamine release. And so that's where it comes into play. So I don't want to reiterate what you said in a way that I'm bastardizing it, because it was way more scientific and beautiful. But what I want to get at is, in your opinion, right, which I feel like I already know, but for our listeners, in your opinion, is porn and sex addiction real?
For some people, absolutely. The majority of people, I think, can use porn, have sex without it becoming problematic behavior. So, I want to back it up for a second and talk about dopamine. In my book, I write about the seeking system, and the seeking system is basically all of that circuitry that is the reward circuitry. It kind of gets our attention. And when you think about it, and reason why I wrote my book is that seeking system has been hijacked by how we use our attention. So when we spend all our time on our devices and when we are not interacting in the world in ways that allow those learning signals. Dopamine is a learning signal. So it should fire when we are kind of moving towards something that feels good and is good for us. That would be the ideal thing to pay attention to this. This is good for you. And move away from, to motivate us to move away from pain. So that whole system has gotten so hijacked for young people that, number one, they have incredible levels of now anxiety disorders are the number one thing. It used to be depression, suicidality. And would you believe that the population that seems to be having the most problems with sexually compulsive behavior are university students?
Oh,
And that's not very surprising when you think about these digital natives or really haven't had kind of the good development of their frontal regions as it would happen ordinarily if you were just doing regular social interactions and getting feedback in the world rather than being stuck on a device and not really using the brain mind in the way that it would work better.
Like gaming too. If you think about gaming, social
All of
media,
that.
I mean,
All of
even
that.
online shopping, all of those things, right? That's like instant too.
And it's very isolated. In like, I
Right.
mean, you think of like when we hear about people in like the prison system and they go into solitary confinement. Am I saying that right? And like I think the stats for dementia are like highly increased if you're someone that has to live in that kind of experience. Like we are designed to be social creatures and exercising our brains regularly, learning new things, reading new things, like doing these kind of pushing our edges in ways like this is unfamiliar but still safe. And then I'm practicing using my brain.
But people argue though, social media is social or gaming can be social because you're interacting.
Different kind of social.
But it's different kind of, right? It's different kind of
social with a lot of ease though, right?
The hijacking attention, these devices and the way they write all these programs and everything is designed to hijack attention in a way that is deleterious and is short-circuiting the ability for young people to learn. I sound like an old fart, which is okay as a 5-time grandmother, but
oh, you're a badass. Yeah, you can say whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah. I'm not a grandmother.
Yeah. So, it's like they're not getting the social connections that teach them when you think about it. Competition and cooperation. That's why a lot of kids are not being able to get laid. Even a lab rat needs certain social skills in order to get laid.
Mm-hmm.
So, they're getting hijacked.
Is that true? I'm sorry. I didn't even know that.
Everyone wants to bang you. You gotta.
Oh,
You need a little social skills. But the bottom line is, we are not connected, like you said, both of you, about the social connection, the real time, face to face, flesh to flesh stuff that is satisfying and helps the actual development of the brain all through childhood into actually the brain's not fully cooked into your mid-20s.
Yeah.
These frontal connections that regulate your emotional centers are not fully developed until mid-20s.
So I just want to say so April recently she's a certified sex educator, everyone, and 2024 Sexpert of the Year. Woohoo! And I did my sex education certification training through SPICY in 2008. I remember being in that training and it seemed like there were two schools of thought and they were very divided. It was very like one or the other. There was this major like binary experience with the idea about sex addiction. And it was one, it's not a real thing. And the other one is, it is very much a real thing. And I really like what you're saying. You're bringing in that, yes, for a lot of people, it can be and is. And that's not the case for everyone. And what we were talking about before is also like, just like we do with orientation and gender, like, I don't get to tell you what your orientation and your gender is. You decide for you, right? Like, just like I don't get to tell you, oh, you have an addiction or you don't have an addiction or addiction's not real for you or it is real for you. And so I think that that's why we wanted to talk about this, is to open up the conversation beyond what we have been hearing both on our podcast and outside our podcast and in our trainings. So the terminology that I'm going to be using here might say addiction or just compulsivity, but I'm saying that in an umbrella way where it could be one or the other for whomever you are. So let's talk about, I'm really curious about some of the reasons why someone might start to consume porn or sex compulsively. Like what are some of the things you've seen in your clients that's bringing them into this place of compulsivity? And then also what's happening to the brain chemically, hormonally, emotionally to make it something that it's really hard for them to move away from? I guess you kind of already discussed that a little bit, but maybe if you could share a little more.
Yeah, that's a great question. So some people are predisposed to this learning gone bad. Now, even with social media use and online shopping, a lot of people can do that in a way that works, that isn't compulsive. They can enjoy it. I love shopping online.
Me too now.
I'm not hijacked. I'm not spending money I don't have. I don't spend hours. It's something I enjoy, within limits. And most people appear to be able to regulate well enough where they are not completely hijacked, whether it's by social media, although most people who use a little bit more than average social media do report bad moods and do report depression. So, less is more with a lot of these things. Now, let's talk about what predisposes people to these sort of obsessive, kind of compulsive, self-soothing, medicating, kind of self-regulating behaviors. Number one would be having problems with those learning reward circuitries. And that can be to some extent genetic. There's predispositions based on how many receptors and how much of the neurotransmitters you make and how well they get recycled and all of that. So we do understand that there are certain genetic predispositions that make people more vulnerable to, for example, childhood traumas. So if you have those predispositions, plus you have a bumpy childhood, which is going to be my next book, as I was telling you before we started recording, you're likely going to have some sort of manifestation, whether it's anxiety, depression, obsessiveness, anhedonia, which I'm going to focus a lot on today. Anhedonia is the inability to experience satisfying pleasures. That's very much associated with how those reward circuits work.
And that's not just sexual, Nan. That's like any kind of pleasure.
Pleasure, period. There are people for whom they just have a very flat seeking system. They don't have the enthusiasm, the exuberance, the lust for life. They're flat. They feel depressed.
I think I've had Christmas with those folks and like they open presents and it's like there's no like excitement. I'm always like, yeah. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm like, right. There's something that is not experiencing life in a way that is vibrant.
Like the kind of the ups, the highs and the ups and the lows or the downs, or like there's with the addiction world, my understanding is you have people that are they want to do something compulsively to the point so they can feel something,
like chasing the dragon.
Or some people are wanting to compulsively consume something so they don't have to feel anymore because the feelings are too intense. So you're talking about the former, not the latter.
People who are flat and they just don't get pleasure, and sometimes what they'll turn to is overeating, over drinking, over sexing, anything like you said, April, trying to feel. And very often people that have these sexually compulsive behaviors actually are not they don't get a lot of pleasure. They don't get a lot of satisfaction. That's one of the criterion for the diagnosis. I can go over the diagnosis if you want. When we get to the part where we want to talk with your readers, how do you decide? How do you begin to sort of evaluate for yourself or for your partner if these things are becoming problematic? I think it would be very helpful for us to go over the criteria.
Yeah, yes. Our next question was going to be about that, but how does someone know for themselves, my compulsion is turning into addiction, or I have some sort of compulsive behavior,
or my partner. Right?
We're going to start with the self, and then the part about the partner
you
piece.
I think that's a good place to start for yourself. So I'm just going to pull up the diagnostic criteria so we can go over them.
Is this from the DSM?
Yes. Is this the DSM?
This is actually from the ICD, the International Classification of the Diseases, ICD. So here we go. All right. So in general, what it is people their persistent pattern of failure to control these intense urges. So they're having these urges and impulses resulting in these repetitive sexual behaviors. And it has to be then including one or more of the following that I'm going to explain. So, number one, the sexual activities hijack their attention and become the central focus of their lives to the point of neglecting their health, neglecting their personal care, interest, activities, and responsibilities. So, another criteria is if the person has made numerous unsuccessful attempts to control the sexual behaviors. And another criteria is, do they continue to engage in the behaviors in spite of adverse events? So, relationship ruptures, occupational consequences, a negative impact on health. It could be something like, keep repeating with sexual diseases and all that. And one of the other criteria is the person experiences little or perhaps no actual pleasure or satisfaction. And this has to continue for 6 months in order to fit that actual diagnosis. And the other thing is, before you can make that diagnosis of the compulsive sexual behavior disorder, there's no real diagnosis of sexual addiction. You have to rule out that the person's issues don't have to do with their moral judgments, disapproval about sexual impulses or urges. That them having their judgments about it is not enough. It's got to actually create a problem in their lives. And I would also add, you need to rule out the person who is making that judgment, their own biases. So we can be biased. We could be, oh, there's no such thing as sex addiction, and look at somebody, or we could be biased and say, oh, that is sex addiction based on our religiosity, our morality, our sexual histories, all of that. Is that making sense?
Yeah,
Yes.
totally.
I'm wondering, so if someone is out there listening, let's say there's a therapist listening, right? Whether they're a sex therapist. And I know the DSM classifies sex addiction kind of in kind of a wider umbrella. And sometimes people get wrongfully, let's say, diagnosed. And I like the text that you had brought up, and it's called the ISD. So
ICD, International Classification of Diseases.
Okay.
So I'm really not, when I did the research, they didn't talk about DSM at all.
Oh,
okay.
They were all talking about ICD. And I did a kind of deep dive before the show to look at both sides of the argument. And the bottom line, ladies, is they've done such bad research on this. The methodology of the research has been so crappy that it's really hard to make any big statements about it one way or the other.
And you definitely don't have to, but I think what I was kind of getting at is that if some folks out there, which I think we've brought into light so far with the show, but if someone's out there and let's say they're seeking therapy because they feel like they are addicted to porn, it's hitting some of those points, right, that you had just brought up. And then they go to their therapist and their therapist says, look, sex addiction isn't real. So, but I think there's a way for them to feel like they are honored, because if you feel like it is this compulsion that you can't control, or that is getting in the way of your everyday life, your health, you're taking care of your children, your job. So I think there is an honor system there to be like, yeah, that might be something you have to look at. This compulsion is taking over your life. And on the flip side, if you're a therapist that is treating someone and is like, oh, you're addicted to sex, when the person's just coming in because they are
like to bang a different person every night,
right? Or they love porn so much that they love to watch it all the time.
But that person's like, but I like this, I'm fine,
right? Yeah. And they're like, well, then so maybe there's. I just wanted to bring that to light because there's two very different perspectives here, and I think that it's important to honor both of them, but also the judgment piece, like reflecting your own judgments if you're treating someone, or reflecting your own judgments if you're judging someone that you feel is like addicted to porn, I think is really important to bring up or highlight.
I think it's a both and universe. There are certainly, I understand why people are very against the diagnosis that's been routinely made about anybody who does anything other than, vanilla sex in the morally a prescribed way. The sex scripts that we have for North America, how that's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talk about that. And one of the best judges of somebody's experience is them. If they're coming to you, now, if somebody comes to me and thinks that their sexual behavior is a problem, I'm going to listen very deeply and I'm going to be able to hear. Like, I think one of the problems with us in general across the board is we are not really listening deeply. Everybody has got this like fast, whether it's dealing with trans stuff, if a kid has a gender issue, like immediately they're jumping to the inclusion, they go in one way. You know what I'm saying? We have to listen more deeply into something and take some time to listen in and to feel our way into a person's experience. And sometimes the person is a couple who are having very different experiences. I can't tell you how many times I've had, a woman call me and tell me my husband has a sex addiction. And based on they think that their husband is watching too much porn. So it's their assessment of the partner. And sometimes their definition of too much porn is any porn. So, people will pathologize that. And it's also happened with me because I'm pretty sex positive. I think I'm very sex positive. So I tend not to like read addictions into things. And there are times that people have presented on the surface as this is just a mismatch of sexual desire. So I have one particular, is it okay if I go into a case study now?
Yeah.
So I have one couple that presented where there was a discrepancy in desire. The woman had a couple of small kids. She wasn't into sex. He was into sex a lot more. And I'm like, oh, this is simple, right? This happens when women are in long-term relationships, especially when their maternal care systems are cock blocking lust, as I've written about in my book. So I kind of like looked at it in that way, right? And when I was listening a little bit more deeply, and I was listening to her experience as well as his. So they were having sex a lot, a couple of times a day.
Wow.
And he seemed to be dissatisfied, like it was never enough. And I'm kind of thinking, okay. And then it got even more complicated because she had a substance abuse history. And so it was a lot. I won't get into too many, I don't want to identify them with too many details, but I will say this is very common in a way. What happens is something gets revealed in time, like his infidelity. Okay. So here he's having sex with her a couple of times a day, and she finds that he is texting with sex workers from when he's traveling. And then I took a step back and I listened more deeply, and there were a lot of other issues going on with him, a lot of childhood trauma, a lot of self-medication. So it became very clear that this was not a simple case of a desire discrepancy issue. This was a real problem. His behavior was so compulsive. He put his marriage at risk. He put his wife's mental health at risk, so like we have to listen and we have to take the time to dig in without judgment. Like I was kind of, thinking, oh, this is just an everyday case of something that's the desired discrepancy. And there was a lot going on. And actually, it's turning out very well because they're both working on themselves. Yeah. And they're both handling some of these issues that they were using the substances or the sex to regulate. So that's an example of the having to listen in. Now, some therapists like, oh, you can have sex a lot of times a day and still want sex, and it's not a problem. And you have to listen even more deeply to see, is it a problem? If he's risking his marriage because his wife was very upset and, going out and being compulsive and making bad decisions, you have to take the step back and say, there's something going on here.
Yeah. I think that's such a helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Like
Yeah.
case study that a lot of people can resonate with, even if it's not something they've experienced, but a lot of people have experienced in other ways. And I shared this. So the episode we did with Gigi Engle was, I think it was the first time I shared that was it that episode, or was it one before that?
It was
Something right before that I shared that I have had what I will call like a heavy addiction.
I think
with
it was with Dr. Kat.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because we're talking about like psychedelics and stuff. Anyways, and I didn't share what it is, and I don't need to share what the substance is, and I'm not going to do that. That was very clear. It was a chemical thing. Like I was having withdrawal symptoms. It was really affecting my. If I were to try to stop, I couldn't stop. I had the mind, body, everything. Every part of me was very hooked on this thing. But I've also had moments in life, so that I've had that experience, right? And I'm grateful for coming out of that. Thank God, and also grateful for having that because it informed me a lot about like I used to have this sort of like I don't have an addictive personality. Well, look at me. Well, actually, I'm capable of all kinds of things. But I've also had experiences, I think it was my early 20s, where I thought I was addicted to porn. And
How come you pointed to me?
I don't know why. I don't know why I did that. I'm not sure.
Like, a second.
No. Anyways, I'm pointed to her for that for no reason. I didn't even know her during this time. Or maybe I did. But anyways, it's her fault. But I was addicted to porn.
You're healed now. You're healed. Yeah.
But it was so every night it was like I thought I needed to watch porn to I had this deep desire to watch it every night. I thought I needed to watch it to have an orgasm. And I was like, am I addicted to my vibrator or porn or both? And like, is this becoming a problem? And then I had some life circumstances that just pulled me away from all of that. And it just was like, oh, it just kind of naturally worked its way through my system. But it felt like it wasn't, necessarily my body having the creepy crawlies, must watch the porn, which is what people think about with addiction, right? Or like withdrawal symptoms if I didn't, and I wasn't watching it 20 times a day. But I felt like it was very hard to move away from my mind being hooked on the thing. I also, in my late teenage years, had what I'll call a mental addiction to smoking the weeds, the marijuanas at night before going to sleep because I thought that I couldn't sleep without it. But my body was fine. It was just my mind could not move away from it. And I think that like for me, having all these variations of experiences, knowing what it feels like my body, mind, and spirit are fully hooked on something, and or when it's just my mind, neither of them are easy to move away from, and they both felt like they all felt like addictions to me.
Right, and that's
that
what
was my
Gigi
definition.
Engle's point was on our show too. Was that you're not physically dependent. You will not die if you do not have these
like
things.
Move
That's
your mind away from its
Which
like
is-
hook. Still,
May
felt
make a neuroscience point here.
Yes,
Absolutely,
please.
absolutely.
Okay. So when it comes to dependence, addiction, and withdrawal, they're two separate independent processes in the brain. So you don't have to experience withdrawal to be addicted to something. So, there's some things that you will, nicotine, people feel withdrawal very, very strongly in their bodies. The looking at really, I think the issue that makes it cross the line is it hijacking you in a way that compromises your relational, social, balanced health functioning? Is it taking away from your life and becoming something that you're depending on that isn't working very well? Because if it was, think about it. If drugs worked well, you'd only have to do a little bit of them. People want more, more, more. That's one of the signs of addictive processes, is that it may not be physically that you want more because it's addictive in terms of withdrawal, but they're not satisfied. The difference between satisfying sex is you have sex, you feel satisfied, you feel warm and fuzzy, you feel relaxed, and that the reward circuitry is working so that you have some balance and well-being. What really, I think, draws the line between something being, a problem and not is this driving you in a way that is persistent, that you are really hijacked by it, and is it getting in the way of other things in your life? Mm-hmm. I like to think about BDSM practitioners because we can learn a lot from them. Peggy Kleinpatz and Charles Moser are people who are researchers about these sort of things. And Peggy wrote a beautiful paper, Lessons from Extraordinary Lovers. So rather than pathologize people who do BDSM, those kind of practices, what they say is it's safe, Is it sane? Is it consensual? So, when you think about it, is it balanced in your life? Is it bringing you joy? Is it bringing you towards your relationship? Is it enhancing your functioning? Or is it stealing from you? Are you using it to regulate your emotions instead of learning to what people really need to learn to? And this is true of grief, which, we were talking a little bit about that before the show. It's true of all sorts of people grappling with dependencies, addictions. We need to learn how to sit with our feelings and not
Oh.
rush and not rush in to medicate them, to change them, to make them go away.
Yes. Well, 100%. One thing that I love that you said that, because I was just pondering this thing that I have called into my life, and it's like a mantra almost, because and I'm wanting to share because it came from Jim Morrison of The Doors, like talking about, I use drugs to expand my mind, not to escape my mind. And he was talking about drugs in particular, and it was in Oliver Stone, and one of his bandmates said that to him, but he was always living that life borderline with addiction, and then yes, being addicted to drugs, and alcohol, specifically mostly alcohol. But I'm bringing that up because I've brought that into my life when I'm doing things. I'm like, April, am I doing this like a lot? Am I trying to escape, or am I expanding my experience? And I think that is profound to me, and I felt compelled to share that because I do think it's a simplified way of describing your experience with what you are doing. And if it's your partner doing that, maybe that's a question that you could ask them. Hey, are you escaping something? Or are you expanding something? And what's your ultimate objective with this? And maybe look into that.
That's a great segue. Should we talk about how to talk to our partner?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're sitting with these concerns that you might be having about yourself, you still might want to talk to your partner about it. That's another kind of conversation. If your concerns are about your partner, that's going to be pretty potentially charged to have a conversation. So what I would coach people to do, and I actually have some resources on my website, about active listening and how to talk with partners about challenging things. The first thing that you need to do is be clear for yourself. Where's your come from with this? Is this pushing on your buttons because of your issues, or is this truly something that, after sitting with and listening into the criteria and evaluating how you see this impacting your partner and impacting you and your partner, is this something that an issue that you need to raise with the partner? So from there, I would suggest that you would say something to the effect to your partner. Look, there's something that I think might be challenging that I'd like to talk to you about sex. Do you have the space to talk about it now? So you need to frame it, give them the ability to sort of recognize that there's something potentially charged, and also to recognize that they're in the space or not to be able to listen. So this is the kind of coaching I give couples about communicating in general, which if you work on your general communication, it becomes a lot easier to navigate some of the charge stuff about whatever it is. If your partner says, okay, I have space, then ask your partner if the partner can simply listen to you and recognize that this is your concern, and stay with the I statements. Like, I am worried about this when I see that. I'm uncomfortable about this. And stay with your experience in terms of what creates your concern. And come from a place of concern and caring.
Versus the you. Let's be real. The I feel, not you are doing this or you are doing that, because
Right.
that's easy to do and people do it often.
People
No
do
one likes
that
to hear
all the
someone
time.
else tell them who they are, who they should be, or how
And
they
how
think
you
of
feel
you.
like this. I know you feel like this, or you believe
You're
that.
doing
Like,
this because.
yes. So
Right.
I just wanted to highlight that.
That's so important. And to really make it that it's your concern, and that you, because you want to be intimate with your partner, you want to share this, and that you want to give them the opportunity, after they listen to you, if they want to ponder it, if they want to respond to you, that you're open to having another conversation where you're just going to listen to the partner. So it's really challenging for people to stay calm and non-judgmental, because we feel very much at effective partners. That's what a relationship is. And if it doesn't go so well, if the partner gets defensive, don't make it a federal case. Don't say, oh, see, he's got a problem, or oh, see, she's got a problem. Recognize that talking about these kinds of issues can be challenging under the best of circumstances. So you can say to your partner, if they're like getting defensive or they seem angry or they're upset, say, look, it's okay that, it's all right if you don't want to have that conversation now. I'm glad we brought up the issue, and let's take a break from this. Maybe we can come back to it later or tomorrow or something like that. You don't want to judge them for having challenges listening to something, because getting confronted with stuff that might be charged for them is not easy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you need to give people time to process so that they can sit with it, and whatever, and offer the opportunity for the follow-up conversation. So let's say your partner thinks that you're completely off the wall and there's no reason why you should be concerned at all. Then what you need to do is kind of do some processing yourself. Talk to somebody. And it might be good to talk to a sex therapist.
Like a talk to Nan.
Or you go to my website and I give you a free consult just to be able to feel your way a little bit more deeply. What's this about? Where is your triggers about it? And if at the end of the day you're convinced that there's an issue that really needs to be addressed, then you're going to need to make a bid for connection with the partner. Like, I know we talked about it and you didn't agree with me. Is there, can we come back to this? Because you know what, I'm concerned,
It feels like, yeah, I'm concerned is something that lands for me. Like when people are like, you have a problem, right? Like then they're like,
defense.
Is anyone really going to be like, yeah, you're right, I totally do. Instead, so it's like, I'm concerned. And you can like, I
love you and I'm concerned.
I love you and I'm concerned. Yeah, I'm worried. I love you. I care about you. I'm worried about your well-being.
I love you so much. I want you to be your best self.
Right. And maybe this is my issue. You don't even have to be so intent that you're going to make a case like it's a confrontation, like an intervention. Maybe what you want to do is create a dialogue and interchange. You want to create some intimacy where the partner and you get to feel your way more deeply into this, to listen to yourselves, to listen to each other, and think of this as a process. This is not a one-off. This is something that you touch and maybe you'll come back to, and you may come back to again. Now, let's say the partner goes, okay, I think there's something going on here. I think you have, a valid concern. So in terms of if your partner is acknowledging that they have some concern about it, what you can do is, you're not their therapist, but you can listen a little bit more deeply. And then you can talk about how you guys would like to go about addressing it. Does the partner want support? Do you want to, look together for resources? Does the partner want to kind of work on this a little bit, like kind of stew in it and kind of sit in it a little bit longer to feel their way through it? I think what we're lacking in general as a culture right now is patience. Everybody's so hot-tempered and so like short attention span theater. Honestly, having this conversation with the partner is an amazing opportunity to go deeper into really listening and connection, hearing yourself, hearing them. So this is a wonderful opportunity.
And I would add to that too, that the opportunity piece, like with what you're saying, I know it's shitty when we have challenges within ourselves or within relationships and we're like, oh fuck, how did I get here? Or like my life is a mess, or I've been hurting myself or the people I love. And also, like you're saying, if people are willing to actually do the work around it, it actually can be a really interesting version of a blessing to create more closeness, more feelings of safety or honesty, or we're in this together. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there.
So I've seen this with couples when they identify when they kind of get the relief of being able to be transparent with each other about stuff that actually on some level they have been concerned about. That, again, remember that one of the sort of features of when something is a sexually compulsive behavior is that it's not very satisfying. It doesn't feel good. And it's not like it's just about shame. There are people who feel shame because of their religious or moral stuff. This pleasure is not registering properly, most likely because of, as I said before, something that is amiss with their reward circuitry. Something is out of whack for them. And what happens is that being able to navigate this and to be able to kind of do the healing, to be able to let go of the habit and sit in the feeling. I mean, that's what people do in recovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so there is a way to heal these, make new neural pathways, right? Because I know the answer, but I just want to give people out there that are listening that are like, wait a second, I have to sit with this, but then what? I have to sit with this, and then what do I do? And then after that, what do I do? Right? And this is a continuation, and I do want you to speak to that because there is hope. I know that there is for everyone that suffers from any kind of compulsion or disorder or addiction.
So that's a great point, April, because addiction is learning gone bad. It's learning. It's not a disease that's like going to be, you got to cure. It's learning gone bad. And you can actually train yourself with a little help from some coaching or a little help from some new habits to find alternate ways to be able to address those negative emotions, to be able to tolerate the feelings. And very often, what happens is people actually, when they start tolerating the negative feelings, you're never going to believe what happens. They start feeling more of the positive feelings.
Whoa.
So I've seen this in so many cases where somebody has been compulsive about some sort of substance or sex, that as they go through the pain of their feelings, and often it can take them back to like childhood shit, stuff that kind of interfered with their learning how to regulate different ways, that they feel their feelings and they go, oh, wait a second, all of a sudden, wow, I'm just recognizing there's so much I haven't been able to feel. So by short circuiting the ability to sit with the negative emotional experiences, the pain, the grief, the sadness, the fear, the rage, then what happens is that they learn they can actually tolerate feelings and the emotional sort of possibilities of being able to feel the positive feelings get dialed up.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of time there's a lot of grief in these habits where people are, sort of treating grief, loss, emotional pain, in addition to some predisposition. And you know what I think we really need to talk about is how stress affects the brain.
Yes, I think that's
And
a great
how
idea.
and how stress predisposes people to the learning gone bad.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my theory about the proliferation of these kind of problems with affect regulation in the college students, where they have so much anxiety, they have so much just suicidality. It's like off the charts. And then now there are some reports of more compulsive sexual behaviors. So it's like when people are stressed, the mechanisms of being able to feel the positive emotions get hijacked. So having perpetual levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone that's meant to mobilize your ability to respond to something, what it does, it hijacks the dopamine, which is the feel-good neurotransmitter, the slutty neurotransmitter, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Approach this, avoid that. Hijacks that, turns it into more stress hormones. And guess what? You've got a really anxious brain. You've got a brain that's going to be more fear reactive. You got a brain that's going to be more panicky. You got a brain that's going to be more hot tempered. In my book, I talked about those imbalances and how it affects our sexuality, but it affects a whole lot more mood, which is anything. I just published a paper that talks about these theories, affective neuroscience theory, and how this needs to be part of research in sexual medicine and clinical practice, that we need to understand how these core emotions, and dopamine is part of the seeking system. When we hijack that to use it, spend it like on social media instead of in interactions, our learning is going to get screwed up. Dopamine is a learning chemical. It's supposed to get our attention on what feels good and is good for us, or what we need to avoid, and it's gotten hijacked.
This is all just like so awesome and insightful, and I know we have to wrap up soon, but I have a really weird question. I don't know if you have the answer to it. Do animals, like non-human creatures, like does a lion,
like mammals?
Yeah, mammals, like or jellyfish, but like let's say mammal. Do they experience addiction? Do they have? Do you know anything about this?
Yeah, dude. My dog's addicted to a few things, like a ball.
Well, we know that mammals have the same circuitry in the basement of their brains, and if you implant these electrodes that stimulate the areas that release dopamine, they'll push and push and push and push until they drop over dead.
Oh, like I remember the rat study. There was like the rats,
exactly,
right? Like,
yes.
But they were living in a shitty environment, so they were unhappy, a small confined environment, and so they had the little beaker thing or whatever, the feeder with cocaine, liquid cocaine,
right?
And they would hit it over and over again. But when they were living in a happy environment where all this space and rat life was lovely, they were not killing themselves on the cocaine.
So that's a great example. That's cocaine.
Yeah.
But when you put an electrode right into those hedonic hotspots, it doesn't even matter their environment. They're going to press that bar until they fall, because it's just like mainline right into the pleasure center.
Like food. Like if they were like, we're in a happy environment, we want food, they're going to keep eating the food.
Well, they'll eat the food till they're satisfied. But what I'm trying to highlight is that when it comes to the brain, there are places in the brain when you stimulate that will hijack normal behaviors to the point where it's not going to be mediated by having a good environment. The cocaine studies, if the animals were in a good environment, guess what? They were getting good social joy and play. Their brains were working more normally. But you can hijack the brain with electrodes. And it's just talking about the circuitry is there.
Well, that makes sense, because if you look at animals in captivity versus animals in the wild, there's a lot of different behaviors that they aspire to do and they end up doing, right? There's like more depression in captivity. There's animals that like lash out more at each other because there's not like a free range. I mean, look at like the Tilikum and some of the which SeaWorld, the orca whale that killed his trainer,
like Shamu or something.
Tilikum was his name. The one that I'm speaking to was like this great big, beautiful orca male whale that lived in captivity and was totally normal. And one day he fucking snapped at SeaWorld, killed his trainer, and it was like a whole to-do where people were like, these animals can't be in captivity, because he was depressed. His dorsal fin was always arched, because that's what they do when they're in captivity, because they're so depressed, because they can't be in their free space, and they are meant to be travelers. They're meant to go hundreds, if not thousands of miles. So I'm just giving an example of these.
That's a great example of how environment and our ability to engage in the behaviors that are healthy for us is a big part of having a well-balanced emotional brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we 100%. Need to look at, circling back to sex addiction, we should take a step back and look at how is our lives working? Are we so stressed out? Let's address the fucking stress. Let's make good choices about how life can be better quality life, that we don't have to. In cases of men that I've treated, they've masturbated so much that their penises bleed. Or people who are raised on porn and don't know how to have sex with another person. I had all these other case presentations I can come back and talk about. But, if we need to look at the biggest of pictures, how do we live in a way that is going to promote more well-being?
Yeah.
Rather than just keep pushing harder. Like I said, we really need to slow our roll.
Yeah.
And be there now and be present.
I love that. And no one out there is hopefully living anywhere under duress, right? I hope not. I know there are cases, but I just want to say, unlike Tillicum, who was forced into this environment, we all can actually, we have the freedom. At least I know that a lot of us do. We kind of bind ourselves with these chains that are self-created a lot of times, where we think we're bound to something because we have to keep up with the Joneses. We have to do this thing. I have to go to provide for my family, or I have to go to this thing because I need to make myself, I don't know. There's millions, if not trillions of cases of what people have to do.
Yeah.
So I'm just
Right.
saying, like, we have to be in the now. And that isn't a solution that maybe is easy to swallow for some people, because it took me a long fucking time. And still I struggle with being in the moment and learning that I have the power within myself to heal the things that I want to heal, that I think are an issue for my life, that do create ruptures or fractures in my relationships and within my occupational life. So, and again, I'm just another human. Amy is too. We're just two humans, right? We're with Dr. Nan, who is a PhD. She's so well rehearsed in this, and you still struggle, Dr. Nan. You say too, with anxiety and things. You're like, dude, this is sometimes it's lineal. It's in my fucking DNA. Sometimes I don't know what to do, but I work on it.
You know what? I'll share one thing when we wrap up is I think the most transformational thing I've learned, that I can be both anxious in the moment and I can also hold space to be more present and more joyful. I am not looking for me to eradicate the anxiety. I see the anxiety as information. And I talk about this, all of our emotions, fear, rage, panic, grief, all of that gives us information, and it's a both and world. It's not like no sex addiction. We can have challenges and have difficult feelings, and we can, by accepting more and more that we have them, and also getting a lot of support. When we were going through a rough time, in the past couple of months, both my parents died. My mom was so crazy. And I've also 2 new grandchildren born. And I've taken a lot of sessions with my dear husband, Sean. He's listened to me and I've listened to him. We hold the space, which brings us back to the great conversations, the people who might have concerns about themselves or their partners. It's such an opportunity to really connect and to hold space for each other. That's what is ultimately going to decrease our stress and improve the quality of our lives, is these really supportive relationships.
Yeah.
Yes. So seek support, everyone, because even now, even if you don't have the economic means at this point to get a good therapist, there are different tools, and there are people that will be able to help you if you have the capacity to reach out. You're only as good as the support that's around you, right? You can only be as good as those that are supporting you. And sometimes friends can, and sometimes family can, but professional help from an uninterested third party is something that has changed my life. And when I don't have that for a while, I know that I feel that. So reach out to someone like Dr. Nan, and you give a free consult, and you have books that cost nearly nothing in the grand scheme of things, right? It's like spend $30 on a book, y'all. Spend that, or like get the Audible. Like it's just part of the journey to help yourself. If you can read English and you want to help, like have that, and then you can slowly read it and learn about what's happening. And Why Good Sex Matters is such a great book, and it's been out for quite some time. It's phenomenal. And I know you want to say something. I'm so sorry.
One last thing. One of the things that we haven't talked about, which is so foundational, is that one of the best things that you can learn to calm your nervous system is how to harness attention on your breath and just make your exhalation a little bit longer than your inhale. On my website, I have free videos people can go to about breath training, how to be able to use the energy locks, which are the bells and whistles of some yoga stuff, and also how to do active listening, how to hold that space. Free stuff.
That's free. That's free. Okay. So Dr. Nan, we love you so much. Can you tell people how to find you, your website, how to work with you if you're taking new clients? I know you're super busy, but and especially congrats on your new grandchild.
Thank you. Yes, I work with people short term. So this is not very long. I do coaching. So like some people, it's 4 to 6 sessions. They read my book, they learn about how the core emotions work, and then what I do is help them create tools and a plan, bottom up, working with the breath to calm the nervous system, to get into that receptive, resourceful place, and then give themselves new directions about the decisions and the directions they want to go. And then they can have free coaching by text for me for life if they work with me, even for just a session or two.
That is really, really cool.
Ask,
That's awesome.
ask Dr. Nan, and that's spelled out doctor. And you can get my book. You can follow me on, I do stuff on Instagram, not as much as I would like to. I will be doing more stuff. And I have a YouTube channel that I'll be posting a lot more stuff. So do the breath tools, reach out. I will make sure that I get space for any of your listeners who want to speak with me.
Dr. Nan's the best.
We really are. We love you so much. Like, and it's askdrnan.com, and doctor is spelled out, everyone. So you can check Dr. Nan's work out. She is in our book so many times. You can get her book. She's in the process of writing another book, and she's been doing this for a long time. And we just always value you being on the show and what you provide. And I hope that everyone out there, if you did have any feelings about the previous show that sort of triggered and brought up this topic, hopefully you can get some resolve and feel that we are honoring you, because we do value all of the humans out there listening, and we value your opinion, we value your journey, we value your experience, and we are not here to tell you what you should or should not do, but we want you to know that you have support and you have that beautiful body and mind. And thank you for being part of the Shameless Sex revolution, because you really are. And yeah,
consider me family.
You are. You're like, I mean, you're our Dr. Nan.
Yeah.
I mean, you're like a mother, a sister, an auntie. You're not a grandma to me. I'm sorry. Okay.
She just had her fifth grandbaby.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you.
You're too young to be a grandmother. Yes.
Yes. It's a beautiful thing. It's got me in touch with my lust for life and my joy and feeling very young. Carrying around the kids. Yep.
Yeah.
So keep me in the loop and have a wonderful, wonderful time. The work that you're doing is stellar.
Thank you.
Thank you. That means to all of you out there too. All the work you're doing is stellar. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Rate us on iTunes if you haven't done so. It just helps more people find folks like Dr. Nan. This is a free resource for you. We value you. There's also Spotify. You can rate us. And we love each and every one of you. And we'll see you next Tuesday. Ciao for now.